Hello everyone. Welcome to another Fabric conversation at Microsoft Fabric Cafe. My name is Merdad Abdullahi, the community lead of this great community. So I'm going to kick it off. Everyone, just feel free to just say hi in the chat, and let's just know each other well. Know while we are going through the introduction and waiting for everyone to be notified and join the session. That said, I'm going to just share my screen to see what we have for today. Today is June 7th, 2025. Here in my site, 7 a.m. in Pacific time, and the Fabric Coffee session number 35 at Microsoft Fabric Cafe. So we are part of Microsoft Learn community, a tech community actually, the tech community of Microsoft, which is having the learning groups now. We are in the transitioning of moving from Teams, learning rooms to Microsoft Tech based, groups that you can just join there. We're doing some preparation there in Microsoft Tech community, and then from there you can just join the group, start discussions, and get basically some sort of recognitions even. And you can just connect you to your experts in those groups, especially for Microsoft Fabric Cafe, which is a Microsoft Learn community with over 4,000 members around the globe, and we are focusing on Microsoft Fabric, providing learning and support to Microsoft Fabric users in all levels, for everyone to learn, share, and grow skills together. If you would like to follow us on different platforms, for sure, we have the YouTube channel where you're watching us now, or maybe you're watching us on LinkedIn page. But however, the sessions are going to be immediately available on our YouTube channel once it is done. So of course you can just go and rewatch the past sessions. We had a lot of great content, great sessions with speakers. So on our LinkedIn page, we do our announcement and updates regarding the whatever that is happening in Microsoft Fabric, Microsoft Learn, and Microsoft Fabric Cafe. As I mentioned, the third link here is going to land you in Microsoft Community group of Microsoft Fabric Cafe, which is a tiny URL / MS Fabric Cafe, and a meetup group for doing the RSVPs. We can just also join there and being announced if you would prefer to actually show your presence for the sessions, and there, of course, after this session or for the other sessions, you can just rate them and let us know what did you like or did not like about our sessions. Yeah, I do really appreciate it. So there's a code of conduct for attending the live sessions. I'm pretty sure everyone is going to adhere to them. Thank you very much in advance. And for the past session, the session that we had with Mehdi Safiri regarding Power BI performance tuning, it was a nice session. If you missed that, feel free to watch it on our YouTube channel. And for today we have Andy back to Microsoft Fabric Cafe. He's going to talk about Fabric Warehouse for the DBAs, for database administrator. I'm super excited to learn from him. This is one of the maybe hot topics, how the DBAs are going to move from maybe SQL Server or something like that to act in Fabric Warehouse. So let me invite Andy to the stage and walk through that together. Hello, Andy. Welcome.
Hello, how are you
Yeah, I'm
doing?
doing well. I'm doing well. We
Good, good,
had
good.
ended before, and it was also a great session. The previous time that we had about DBT, and
And the Fabric Warehouse.
yeah, and it was it was really great. It was really great, and I remember the feedbacks that we were getting even during the session and afterward. It was one of those nice sessions. If you miss that,
Very
just
good.
go
Very
and
good.
rewatch it. You're gonna learn lots of things for data engineers. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you for inviting me
It was,
back.
yes, it is our pleasure to have you, and thank you for making yourself available during the weekend. Is really appreciated. And so, Andy, today you're gonna talk about data warehouse, actually a fabric warehouse for DBAs.
Yes. Yes.
Is it something that SQL Server or SQL DBAs can benefit from as well or not?
Yeah, because you've seen a lot of these types of sessions out there. So, for example, um, there's a great session out there around Databricks for the DBA, right? Because there is not this sort of complete boundary and border between what role a DBA, and we'll go through that in this session, what role a DBA does and what skills they can bring, and tools and platforms like Fabric and like Databricks, right? These tools and platforms aren't magic. They still need looking after. There's still best practices, right? So a DBA with their range of skills that they have for SQL Server, for
Yeah.
example, doesn't matter. There could be an Oracle DBA, MySQL, anything like that. All of those skills that they have, we're going to touch on relevancy in features, in the ways in which Fabric Warehouse,
Awesome.
is set up and works as well. Now, there's some things that you can do. There's some things that you can't do. But even when you can't actually do something because it's a cloud product and certain things are locked away, if you still understand how these things work, then when you are able to affect change and when you are able to make sure that developers and data engineers are adhering to some best practices, that's just going to help overall. So that's what I think is there is a requirement, I would say, not just a desire, but a requirement to make sure that
Mhm.
the people in your organization who look after your data infrastructure and your databases also are involved in your cloud products, even if the vendor, okay, says no, we'll look after it all for you. They still need to be involved and they still need to know what's going
Yeah.
on.
Cool. Cool. Awesome. And I'm excited to learn about that. And so, guys, if you have any question, just feel free to enter that in the chat box. And so so far we have some just hello, Sanjay, hi Andy, good afternoon from LinkedIn, and we have
Oh yeah, yeah. Hello, everyone in
Tony
the chat.
in YouTube. So you're gonna share your screen for sure. Please do that while we're preparing. But uh, and was there any update from Microsoft Build with regarding your today's session?
So I'll just make sure you can.
I can
Yeah,
see your screen.
you can
Yeah,
see
I
my
can see your
screen.
screen now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we've got some things that I'll talk about probably towards the end of the session around one of the specific updates for you know, piece of functionality that's gone into the warehouse that's going to be of use going forward. So I'll talk a little
Awesome.
bit
Yeah,
about that. There's no slide
yeah. I'm
content for
jumping ahead.
that, but we'll talk about it at a certain
Okay,
section
cool.
point.
Awesome.
Um,
Awesome.
but
So
yes,
your screen is up here. And yeah, guys, enjoy the session. Andy, the session is over to you and the stage actually. And yeah, guys, enjoy it.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm just going to make sure I've got some focus on my slides. Yes, so, well, again, thank you for hosting, and it's great to be back. I did speak a few months ago around Microsoft Fabric warehouses, but with DBT. Okay, so if you haven't checked that session out, please do. I am an advocate of what DBT can do. There are other products as well. There's SQL Mesh. There's also going to be some inbuilt functionality within Fabric called materialized views that they're not materialized views that you would find, in your normal relational database. This is almost like a DLT thing. And if anyone's familiar with Databricks, Delta Live Tables, that kind of familiar functionality. So I'm on a similar trend here with the Fabric Warehouse, but part of what I do is I'm just going to click hide on that, is I look at new platforms, yes, right? New ways of working, new technology, new features. That's all great. But what happens when you're trying to use that new technology and those new processes with existing roles in organizations, right? Let's say your typical data team in an organization might be comprised of your database developers. They could be SQL focused. There could be data architects. There could be business intelligence and analytics engineers. There could be data analysts. There could be database administrators who look after your data estate and your infrastructure. So I try and look at those roles and then align what areas of responsibility those people can take charge of in cloud platforms. Because cloud platforms, and this will be across Microsoft, it'll be across Amazon, Google, Databricks, where they say, we look after it for you. You don't need to do anything. Well, you actually do need to do some things, and you do need to understand what it's doing as well under the hood. So I've been looking at database administration, and that's what we're going to do in this session. So we're going to look at the Fabric Warehouse, and we're going to marry up the typical roles and responsibilities of a database administrator with what we have in the Fabric Warehouse and where the link is. So a bit about me. My name is Andy Cutler. That QR code will take you to my link tree. So that'll take you to my LinkedIn page, my company, Data High, my personal blog, which is serverlesssql.com, where I blog my community technical posts. I'm also part of Data Toboggan, which is an online free conference where we deal mostly with Synapse and Fabric from a data engineering and data warehousing perspective. A little bit of Power BI in there, a little bit of data modeling, but we mostly concentrate on the kind of back end stuff. So for today, the agenda, we're going to look at compute, connectivity, how data is stored in the warehouse, what metadata is available, and dynamic management views, what we've got in terms of looking at system information, transactions for a DBA, understanding isolation levels and concurrency is important. We have that in the Fabric Warehouse to a limited degree. We also have security. So we're going to look at how we work with security. Set my timer. What tools have we got for monitoring? So how can we see what's going on in the Fabric Warehouse? And when we talk about compute, I'll bring in monitoring a little bit into that. How can we recover from failures? What happens when things go wrong? We look at disaster recovery. How do we link our warehouse into source control? Can we link our warehouse into source control? What options have we got in terms of deployment? And then last, bit of performance tuning, what we can do, and a jumping off point into some documentation for you to dive in to some of the more finer points of performance tuning. And you'll be surprised at everything you might know in SQL Server can be applied in the Fabric Warehouse. Not going to spoil anything, but I'll just use the two words data types. Right, we're going to set the scene for a organization that's very, very enthusiastic about implementing Fabric. It's late on a Friday afternoon, and that person, and we've all worked with that person who hasn't told anyone up front what's going to happen, but they've implemented Fabric. They've got a Fabric warehouse, and the DBA or the accidental DBA has been told, well, you've got to look after it now. They've ignored the message because they want to leave the office, or they want to leave their home office and go downstairs and join their family for dinner. What's going on? I've got to look after what? A Fabric warehouse? It's going to solve all our problems, right? It's a SaaS product, software as a solution. Don't have to do anything, but you're going to need to look after it for the bits that you need to look after. Okay, and an upside down smiley face to indicate, oh, right, okay, I'll have a look into it. So the role of the DBA. Now, this is just what I've put down. Many, 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 many years ago, I played the role of a DBA for a while before I moved more into the development side and data warehousing side. So I like to think I have an empathy and an appreciation. And if you know a DBA in your organization, buy them pizza or the food of their choice and be friends with them. Yeah, be friends with your local DBA. And this isn't an exhaustive list. Okay, lots of amendments to the role, and this is what I like to think standardizes what database administrators bring to an organization. Right, so we've got security. So a DBA is going to manage security in terms of accessing databases and database servers. They're going to be responsible for making sure that those databases and database servers are running to the company's SLAs. They'll be configuring the backup processes and testing recovery processes as well. We're told many, many times, look, fine, you're backing things up, but how do you restore? What's your restore plan? Configuring and installing database software. Yes, you can install SQL Server very easily, but what happens when you're actually trying to configure it? What happens when people start getting dreaded messages when they're trying to do things in a database? Things get locked, there's blocking going on. DBAs can jump in, find out who's doing what, who's blocking who, and resolve those blocks, hopefully. Ultimately, they're keeping those database systems up and running and accessible to the relevant people. And also deployments, right? If you're a developer and you want to deploy things, then the DBA will be involved in setting up the processes in how those changes go onto not just dev databases, but UAT and testing, staging, and production. Okay. Now, if you are a DBA and I've missed something on here, I do apologize. I hope that gives everyone a good idea of the role of the DBA. So in terms of what is Fabric, we'll go through this fairly quickly. This is Fabric Cafe. I hope people that are joining have an appreciation of what Fabric is. But essentially, it's adding, well, significant functionality to a Power BI tenant, in which Power BI is a workload amongst other workloads as well. And the data warehouse is one of those workloads. Now, if anyone's familiar with previous or current Azure services, Synapse Analytics, one of the issues with Synapse Analytics was that there were various different compute engines, and you had to understand all the compute tiers of each of those services to understand pricing, understand what you needed to provision, what we've got now is we've got a single compute that runs all of these engines. Yes, you still need to understand, well, how much compute will each of these services use, but you've got that unified compute layer that you can use rather than having to go and understand lots of other different ways of configuring and creating compute to run services. But it is a software as a service product. There's lots of control abstracted away. And well, one of the biggest departures is that the storage is open source. So it's Parquet, but transactions are all being done by Delta. So Microsoft is using OSS Delta and contributing back to Delta. So as an aside, if you ever want to have a glimpse of what features might be coming up in Fabric Warehouse and Fabric Lakehouse, is look at OSS Delta, look at the releases of Delta and see what functionality is there, because some of that functionality is going to make its way into Fabric. So ultimately, the benefit of Fabric, and I'm just going to bring it all up in one go, is that it's an end-to-end platform, right? It's taking the sometimes difficult work of having to link many different services together to get a holistic data platform, right? Anyone who's worked in any form of architecture on the Azure platform is, even if you were using a product like Synapse Analytics, you still had to tie it all together. And if you were starting to use other services like Azure Data Lake or SQL Database, you had to work with the ways and means in which those services interconnect. With Fabric, it's in one platform, so you can literally load your source data in and then work within Fabric all the way to the end when you're building and distributing reports and dashboards. So the Fabric Warehouse service itself, well, this is T-SQL, right? So it is using Microsoft Transact SQL, right? So everything you know from SQL Server or Azure SQL Database, you can bring to the Fabric Warehouse. There are limitations, and it's something called the T-SQL surface area, right? This is not SQL Server. So SQL Server is a broad product, right, with decades of development in it. The Fabric Warehouse does a specific thing. The clue's in the name. It's a warehouse service. So there aren't going to be all of the T-SQL statements that you would expect to find in SQL Server. But it's also scale. So you don't have to worry about what size your warehouse is. You worry about the overall Fabric compute. We'll look at that. But when a query gets issued to the warehouse, something called the distributed query processor, the DQP, will assess, well, how much compute do I need to run this query, whether it's a select query, an insert, or an update, and it'll provision the necessary compute behind the scenes to run that query. It uses SQL constructs, right? So a warehouse is in effect a database. We can create tables, we can create columns, we've got data types, we can create stored procedures, we've got functions, we've got a subset of functionality, sure, but we've got some of the familiar things that we've got from SQL Server. But now we do have a separation of compute and storage. So the engine that powers the Fabric Warehouse, if anyone was familiar with Synapse Serverless, it's an evolved version of that engine. And we're using the Parquet file format, the compressed file format, to store the data. And that has the statistics within the files as well. And Delta is managing the transaction layer. So in fact, if we're reading and writing data to the Fabric Warehouse, we can actually use Spark to read the data. And there is some integration as well with Spark and the warehouse, because ultimately, the warehouse is publishing Delta logs. Delta logs can be read by other engines. So usage scenarios, yep, the warehouse. Think of further to the right of a data architectural diagram in which we're getting to the point where we're starting to model the data in terms of perhaps a dimensional model. So if anyone is familiar with the concept of facts dimensions, this is where you're going to find those tables in a warehouse. And in a medallion architecture, the warehouse is usually deployed in the gold zone or the modeled zone. But again, that's just me putting this down in terms of a usage scenario. You could use the warehouse and load a bunch of raw data in and then load some models downstream. Hey, I'm not stopping you, but that's roughly where you'll find the warehouse. Okay, right. Like I said in the introduction, it's all magic, right? Well, some of it is. And some things we need to know because we can affect change. Some things we need to know even if we can't do anything, but it gives us an appreciation of what's going on. Not so much of a black box. Right, so capacity planning. Okay, so a DBA will be involved in capacity planning to understand, well, what's going on in terms of how much compute is required to run our workloads. We're going to provision a server. We're going to install SQL Server. We're going to configure it in a certain way to be able to meet those demands. We've got to do the same thing with Fabric, right? So I'm going to bring up these two graphs. Now, when you're working with, let's say, SQL Server on an Azure VM or on an on-premises data center server, they've got fixed capacity, right? They've got fixed compute, CPUs, and RAM. And yes, you can shut down a server and add more RAM or maybe even swap out the CPUs. That's not a trivial thing to do. With Azure VMs, yeah, you can change the size of an Azure VM, but there's downtime to that as well. I mean, even Azure SQL databases, yes, you can change the compute tier of an Azure SQL database, but it's going to be offline while it's doing that operation. So with Fabric, when we're provisioning capacity, we can take into account a rough amount of capacity that's going to run our workloads, but we may not have to worry too much about the spiking of workloads because of the concept of smoothing and bursting. So bursting, I like to think is a technical process, and smoothing is a billing non-technical process. So essentially it means if certain workloads need a little bit more power for a certain point during the day, Microsoft are not going to penalize you. You can burst beyond how much capacity that you've got provisioned to be able to actually run your workload. The smoothing, you have to pay it back. So ultimately, you're borrowing some compute from the future. So if you've got some spiky workloads during, let's say, an overnight processing routine, then you could borrow some capacity that you don't really need during the following day. But it's not going to burst indefinitely. So we've got some guardrails in place and we've got some scale factors in terms of guardrails. So for example, if I just bring up the graph here, okay, so an F2, which is the lowest capacity that you can provision in Fabric, actually the warehouse has a burst factor of 32 times, right? So it'll burst up to complete a workload. Of course, if you're continually doing that, you're going to get throttled. Your capacity is likely going to stop working, and you're either going to have to wait until you paid it back in the future or stop and restart your capacity, but then you're going to get charged for that. That's going to get added to your Azure bill, right? But the scale factors, they do go up, right? So, an F32, an F64, there are the same scale factors of times 12. But of course, you can't abuse these scale factors. You can't just think, oh, okay, well, at an F8, I'm going to get 12 times my capacity. So I'll just do that then. No, no. You'll find yourself quickly being throttled and you won't be able to run anything. Right? It just means that for some spiky workloads, we can burst. As long as we can pay it back in the future, we're okay. So in terms of it being different, right? I don't really want to dwell too much on this table. If you want to take a screenshot, obviously the video is going to be available on YouTube. I don't want to pick through each and every one of these things. But if you notice on the right, Fabric Warehouse, there's lots of no's. Okay. There's lots of no partitioning in the warehouse. There's no indexing. We can't do anything with workload management. It's all automatic at the moment. We don't have very many isolation levels. In fact, we've got one. Don't really have much control over the configuration, right? As we move further to the left, we get more control. So Synapse dedicated SQL pools. Yes, we had some control over the configuration. One of the things that I used to love in dedicated SQL pools is workload isolation. So I could have a single dedicated SQL pool and just chop up bits of it and use it for different things. Total isolation. I could partition, I could index, and that's really down to the storage. So with the Fabric Warehouse, you're storing it in Parquet. That's a columnar-based format. That is the index itself. Now, in terms of the Fabric Compute, it's an Azure service. So when you are working with Fabric, you are provisioning the capacity within Azure. You choose the region, the resource group that Fabric capacity is created in. You choose the size, you choose the region, because it's got data residency, and you can purchase it via pay-as-you-go or reserved pricing. Pay-as-you-go, very useful if you're just doing some development and you're playing around with it for a couple of hours during the day. Reserved pricing is the no-brainer in terms of production and probably even your testing workloads as well, because you'll get significant discounts over the pay-as-you-go. But ultimately, once you've provisioned that capacity within Azure in a specific location, you can then create workspaces or assign workspaces within Power BI, within Fabric, to those capacities. So one Fabric tenancy with many workspaces can be linked to many Fabric capacities. You might not just have one Fabric capacity, you might have multiple, and workspaces can literally just be linked to those capacities. So in terms of connectivity and client tools, so I'm just going to bring up the three tools. So a workspace will expose a SQL endpoint. So I always like to think of a workspace a little bit like a server. Right? If you've got multiple workspaces, they almost act like individual servers, because when you view them in client tools like Management Studio and like Azure Data Studio, which unfortunately is now being deprecated in favor of VS Code with SQL and database plugins, you're going to see your warehouse as a database and the workspace as the server, right? So if I've got three workspaces in my Fabric capacity and I can connect to them in Management Studio, I'll see three servers. And in fact, that's how I'm connecting. In that server box, I'm putting in the SQL endpoint. And the SQL endpoint is the same, but a workspace that has multiple warehouses and multiple lake houses in, right? They're not different endpoint. And as you can see, that endpoint It trips right off the tongue in terms of remembering what that endpoint is, but it's going to be the same. And of course, we've got the warehouse, we've got the Fabric workspace GUI itself. And yeah, I like to put lots and lots of different item types in there just so you can see, wow, there's lots of different items, but the warehouse is just one of them within the GUI. So in terms of storage, like we touched on before, and I'll just bring up the items here. You don't have much, if any, control over the storage. So I do a session around disaster recovery because I like to pick all the easy topics, right? I like to pick all the easy things. And one of the things you can do in a lake house, which when you create a table in a lake house, by default, it creates it as a Delta table. You can create external tables. You can create external tables in a lakehouse over CSV if you were so inclined to do so. But the lakehouse is a little bit more freer with its storage. So actually, what you can do in the lakehouse is go into the GUI and delete a table. You won't see that table anymore. If you go and connect using a tool like Azure Storage Explorer, and there's a little drop down that will say, show me all the active blobs and the inactive, i.e. deleted blobs. You'll find the table with all the Parquet files and the Delta log from where you've deleted. And you can literally right click in Azure Storage Explorer and say, restore. Go back to your Fabric GUI, refresh the table list. The Lakehouse will re-register the table. I mean, it's horrifying in a way that you can have all that control, which is why security posturing is very important. With the warehouse, that's all locked away. So I've taken screenshots of logging into a workspace that has a Fabric warehouse in, and I've scrolled, I've drilled through the folders, and I can see my Parquet files, and I can see my folders that all of my Parquet files and Delta logs are stored in. However, Fabric manages these locations. You can't do anything. You can't go in and delete a table or a folder or a Parquet file. You can't do anything with them. It's locked away. But what I want to say is, does the Lakehouse have shortcuts? Is it equivalent to external tables? In a way, yes. I mean, obviously, with the shortcuts, you're connecting to things like S3, you're connecting to blob storage, things like that. I mean, if you've got files in your Lakehouse files section and you don't want to then recreate them as Delta tables in the Lakehouse, then you can just create an external table over, let's say, Parquet files in the files section. So similar functionality, but they've got their pros and cons of each. Yeah, so with the storage, ultimately, you haven't really got any control. What Microsoft have released recently, I'm sorry for a little laugh, but they've called it intelligent, something like intelligent, warehouse maintenance. Essentially, anyone familiar with Delta tables, they have a retention period. You can change the retention period of the data, but it means that when data is being updated, deleted, older versions of that data will still exist, and you can time travel and go back and query it. One of the powerful features of Delta, because ultimately it's metadata that's controlling all of this. After a certain period of time, or after a configured period, those files can't actually be queried anymore using any of the time travel functionality. They're dead, but you're paying for them. So now in the warehouse, it'll automatically delete these files that aren't even queryable anymore. So it's going to tidy things up. You won't get charged for them. So in terms of metadata and DMVs, so again, I'm just going to bring up the DMVs. We've got a limited number of these system views, right? Because, well, if you scroll through all the DMVs in SQL Server, tons are just not going to be relevant. Most of them aren't relevant. There's a few that you discover that you think, oh, okay, so I can actually see some information that isn't necessarily supported. But we can see, connection requests. So we've got the initial request that comes in, what client application is being used, how they're connecting, so on and so forth. Then we've got the sessions themselves, so what users are doing. We've got active requests, and then we've got things like the query text, right? Everyone wants to get to what SQL query is being ran or being run and how that is affecting the system itself. We've got some better DMVs that help us a little bit further on. So Tony says, is time travel not available in the warehouse? Yes, it is. So time travel is available in the warehouse, but up to a certain point, right? So you can write your T-SQL and say, select from table, put some where filters in, but you've got an as of timestamp, right? So it's bringing in Delta functionality, right? That's effectively what one of the powers of Delta is, this time travel. So yeah, you can just query your data from a specific point in time. It's just the maintenance after, at the moment, it's 30 days within the warehouse. After 30 days, so let's say you've deleted a row, you can still query that row all the way up to 30 days. And then after that, it'll be gone for forever because that's the retention period. You can clone tables, a shallow clone, and use the timestamp functionality if you want to snapshot tables at a specific point in time and then just leave them. They won't get deleted because you're going to insert data from a specific point in time, and that's going to be an active table. In terms of security, yes, workspace admins, they can see all these DMVs and they can kill sessions, right? So many a DBA has had to kill someone's horrendous SQL query because it's bringing the whole system down to its knees. Yep, you can go in there, find the ID and issue a kill command. And then some of the other workspace level permissions have visibility on certain views as well. So for example, member, contributor, and viewer, they can see sessions and requests. They can't see the connections, right? So the workspace admin can see everything. And then it's a little bit brute force, right? Member, contributor, and viewer can see those DMVs. I mean, to my mind, I really wouldn't want a workspace viewer to be able to see sessions and requests. But that's how it is. Right. So my favorite topic, transactions and isolation levels. You'll be pleased to know that it's very simple in the Fabric Warehouse, and it's similar across this style of platform. So it's similar in Databricks in terms of what's supported, in terms of fewer isolation levels. We've got snapshot isolation. So if I was to pick my favorite isolation, it would probably be snapshot because it is wonderfully named optimistic. Essentially, and I'm just going to bring the rest of the information up so you can have a look while I talk. It's optimistic because it is attempting to minimize locking and blocking for both reading and writing, right? So data warehouse systems, especially, such a pain when you're writing data and allowing people to read data as well. Anyone done any SQL development? Hopefully, I would like to think people have put no lock on everything as a rite of passage, right? Or the read uncommitted statement at the beginning of every select query, right? SQL Server, decades of development, lots of different isolation levels for all sorts of different scenarios. We've got snapshot isolation, which means the data can be written, but also read at the same time. But the data that you're reading is going to be consistent. Once the data's finished writing, that'll be the version of the data that is read on the next read. So when we're inserting or deleting any data, we're going to have what's called an intent exclusive lock, but it's not going to stop reading. If we're selecting or we're issuing, any kind of, table structure changes, then we're going to get some locks there. We've got schema stability and schema modification locks that get applied. But in terms of data modifications, it's very minimal in terms of what it's doing. I don't think so a slide I added would show you what happens in an update statement, kind of a first past the post in terms of transactional activity. But when you're reading data, you will be able to write data as well. So in terms of security and permissions, the hierarchy is, yes, you give people access to Fabric, right? You can set up Active Directory groups. You can apply those groups to certain functionalities within Fabric. But ultimately, when you're creating a warehouse, you're going to create it within a workspace. So the first level of security that you have to decide upon is workspace level access, right? And we've still got 4 workspace level roles. They haven't changed since Fabric's turned up and been integrated within Power BI. We've got admin, member, contributor, and we've got viewer. And again, admin, member, and contributor, people get given the control permissions, which again is very coarse grain. If you're a viewer in a workspace, you get automatically allocated to be a DB data reader, right? And then if we start creating warehouses within our workspace, we've got more granular permissions, right? So we can go in and issue those familiar statements like grant, select on schema to, group, person, whatever. But in terms of providing permissions to people in a warehouse, we share an item. I don't like the term share. I always think of share as like share a report or share a dashboard or something like that. This is what we have. And sharing a warehouse applies the permissions, right? And we've got some various options in there. We can read all the data using SQL, which gives you the DB data reader role. And there's some other permissions there in terms of accessing the underlying files itself, which you can't really do much with a Fabric warehouse. Read it in Spark. So I suppose, yes, you can use that functionality. And also some permissions to be able to build reports from the warehouse as well. So it's like multi-leveled. So in terms of monitoring, I'm just going to bring that up there. Yes, we've got the Fabric Capacity Metrics app, which is not necessarily the most straightforward app to use. Bursting and smoothing, I'm looking at you in terms of understanding overages and burn down. I mean, that in itself is a whole day's worth of training right there. But ultimately, within the Fabric Metrics app, we're going to be able to see what capacity units, what CUs a warehouse has used. Yes, there's some OneLake compute charges in there as well. But we're going to be able to see the warehouse queries. And actually, what we can do is, and we don't have it in this session, I'm probably going to upload it to GitHub at some point when I get the full report working. But within the Fabric Metrics app, we've got like a workload ID. And actually, within the Fabric warehouse, we can match to an ID for a SQL query. So we can actually track a SQL query, an individual SQL query, all the way through to the Fabric Capacity app. Maybe we want to calculate exactly how much a SQL query is actually using in terms of capacity, and then go and charge that person some money, whoever's run that big query. We can link them though. So we go into query insights. So these are the specific DMVs within the Fabric warehouse that are more tailored for the warehouse service. Each of these, I think I've probably got a point, but I might as well mention it now. Each of these query insights views has the SQL query that's being run. So we don't have to go and join to another system view to go and get the SQL that's being run. A real bugbear of mine, from SQL Server. But each of these views is going to show you the SQL that's actually run. Right, so we've got the most granular, which is the requests history. Right, so you go query that table. That's going to show you some stats about the query that's been run. Now we start getting into the trend analysis. So what Fabric does, or what this Query Insights does behind the scenes, is when the warehouse receives the query store. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, this is kind of it. I mean, I'm hoping it's going to be expanded on. It should be expanded on. But ultimately, those query insights, I mean, we've got the ability, just as an aside, we've got the ability now to see the query plan, which is useful to a point. But if we can't actually affect how we distribute our data in a table with partitioning, it's going to give us a certain amount of information. But yes, so I'm going to actually bring up these other query insights views, which are every warehouse will have a query insights schema. When you open that schema, you'll have the available views there. But essentially, it'll receive a SQL query. And obviously, while that SQL query is being run by the compute, that SQL query goes into Query Insights. If you run the same SQL query, it aggregates the performance together. So we get some mins, we get some maxes, we get some averages. Interestingly enough, filters are not included in this aggregation. So you can actually query different time ranges, but it's going to aggregate the same query. And ultimately, these Query Insights DMVs will show you execution over time. So you can bring these views into Power BI. I've built reports using these views to see, let's say, the median execution time over time. So if you see your median execution time going up over a certain amount of time, that might be something that you need to jump in and look at before performance degrades. Yes, we've got a 30-day, at the moment, a 30-day retention period in terms of these query insights. So if you want to keep these for any length of time, dump them into a table. In terms of cost calculation, this applies across any of the services as well. But if anyone really wants to understand what's going on in terms of how much things are costing for the warehouse, perhaps you've got a Fabric Capacity, which is highly likely that is running all the other different workloads as well, not just the Fabric warehouse. So with that Fabric Capacity Metrics app, yes, we can get at how many capacity units are being used for the warehouse. But let's say we've got an F2, and at the moment at pay-as-you-go pricing, that's 31 pence per hour to run an F2. Let's say that I ran a workload in the Fabric warehouse and it consumed 8,000 CPUs. So on an hourly basis, I'm going to get access to 7,200 capacity units. per CU is just half of the 31 pence. So we're looking at about 15 pence per CU per hour. Then we're just going to do a calculation. I'm just going to bring it up here. Sorry. So at 8,000 CUs, we're going to times that by the cost, but we're going to divide that by the number of seconds in the hour, and 35 pence, which you can kind of see from that example. Well, if 7,200 CUs cost me 31 pence, 8,000 CPUs, which is CUs, which is a little bit more than 7,200, that's 35 pence, right? So you can just use that calculation to work out how much things are actually costing. It's a hot topic. It's a hot topic. And actually, Formu has done a blog with a great cost calculator. So if you go to type in FOURMOO, fabric capacity calculator, pricing calculator, you'll get a blog post with it on. Okay, so a few minutes left. So disaster recovery. Right, so we've got restore in place. This, what I'll do is I'll bring that up. So it's the whole warehouse at the moment, not individual tables. Right? Yes, you can clone tables, but that's not really restoring something. You could clone a table, make some changes, and if those changes went wrong, restore it from the clone, insert into from the clone, or rename the clone table. But when we're restoring a warehouse, unfortunately, it's the whole warehouse. So we can use two types of restore points. Anyone familiar with Azure services that have restore points? I mean, Synapse Dedicated SQL Pool had the same functionality. We've got automatic restore points, and actually it's 30 days available. I need to update this slide to say 30 days. So there's 30 days retention period. Restore points are being taken all the way through the day. So you can go back to an automated restore point. So you wouldn't have to do anything. If you wanted to restore your database back to what it was yesterday, go in, restore the database, but it's the whole warehouse. If you want some more control over what you can go back to, then you've got these manual restore points. So let's say before a big production change, let's say before a nightly load or an hourly load, perhaps, create a restore point. Any problems, you can go back to that restore point. But it's going to be the whole warehouse, right? Unfortunately. Also, again, if you delete the warehouse, it's gone. You probably open a case with Microsoft support, but it won't be under your own control to be able to get back a warehouse that you've deleted from a Fabric workspace. If you've deleted the Fabric workspace, they can be restored. I think there might be an idea on the Fabric ideas. I'm going to search for that because I think there is, in terms of being able to restore a warehouse in terms of deletion. All the files should be there. I don't think it would be too much effort for Microsoft to implement that feature, but it's just a warning. So if you delete that warehouse, it's gone, which is why that security is so important. Yes, in terms of source control, I'll bring this up. Right, we can integrate the workspace into Git, and that automatically source controls the Fabric warehouse SQL objects. So if anyone is familiar with using Azure, any DBAs that are using, database projects, SSDT, things like that, it's similar. Now, again, I talk about Azure Data Studio. VS Code has got database projects. So we can source control a warehouse offline, do it as we would normally do with a SQL Server database. We're going to grab that, tables, store procedures, so on and so forth, and then we can deploy. We can see we've integrated it with the workspace itself. This is all Data Studio. We can run deployments using DAC packs. There are some limitations. You're going to need to set some of the properties because I mentioned earlier about the T-SQL surface area or the limitations. Ultimately, we can't do certain things in the warehouse. Altering a table and renaming a column and dropping a column is almost supported. I'm looking at my clock and it's like the 7th of June. I'm hoping it's imminent in terms of that functionality being available. So there's certain things you're going to be able to do when you're deploying using, SQL package and DAC pack and those familiar deployment processes. You've also got deployment pipelines. However, they're pretty brutal. At the moment, if you were to remove or even adding a column to a table, deployment pipelines completely blows the table away and recreates it with no data in it. So I don't use deployment pipelines to be quite honest for things like lake houses and warehouses. And then the last thing, performance tuning. Statistics. Yes, it does, like a lot of the database systems do, intelligent statistics creation. But you can create your own statistics if you are running some performance benchmarks and you find that by creating and managing your own statistics on certain tables for certain queries that you want to run that are not necessarily going to be picked up by the automated statistics creation process, by all means, you've got control over doing that. V-order. So we've got some special sauce in terms of a read performance optimizer. So what I mean by that is when data is loaded into a lakehouse table or a warehouse table, this process called V-ordering can be applied. It introduces further compression, which makes reading more efficient and actually costs less capacity units. I think I've done a blog about V-order on and V-order off. However, what it does do is it gives you an overhead when you're writing data. So actually, there's some recommendations that Microsoft say if you're staging data and it's not going to be read that often, best to switch V-order off because your writing is going to be a lot faster and the degradation in read performance is not going to really matter because you're only going to use it for once as you're loading data. At the moment in a warehouse, you can only switch it on or off. You can't select individual tables, which is a bit of a shame. But if you're using a warehouse to stage data, maybe you've got a staging schema and you want to just load in raw data. Maybe you're using copy into from data lake. You can bring it in, switch V-order off, bring it in. It's going to speed up the ingestion of your data. Trickle loads. Yeah, this is not real-time intelligence. The more individual data modification statements you make to the warehouse, the less efficient it's going to be because under the hood, it's going to constantly be creating lots of little Parquet files all the time. All of these little inserts and updates and deletes, they all work and output individual Parquet files. Yes, there's automatic maintenance that the warehouse will do to scoop up these files and turn them into larger files that are more efficient for reading. But if you're doing lots and lots of little trickle inserts and your reading is tanking in terms of performance, that's why. Data types. I mean, I spoke about this a lot with Synapse Serverless, in that Synapse Serverless, which was used to read data using T-SQL over data in a data lake, Parquet, CSV, JSON, would kind of just brute force the data types. I mean, everything just seemed to be a varchar at 4,000 or 8,000, right? Which absolutely tanks performance Because what happens is under the hood, the engine that runs the warehouse and the engine that runs Synapse Serverless, when it gets a query in and it looks at the data that it needs to do something with, it's looking at the data types. It's assigning compute based on those data types. So the more efficient you are with your data types, the less compute that Fabric and Synapse will provision to run the queries. Right? If everything's varchar 4000, Fabric just thinks, well, you're bringing in tons of varchar data, so I'm going to have to create loads of compute behind the scenes, and it becomes less efficient. So again, choose good data types. And yes, there's a link to a warehouse performance guideline. Again, just type in Microsoft Fabric Warehouse Performance Guideline. Okay, so we've come to the end of the session. As per Fabric Cafe funness, we got some riddles.
Hey, Andy, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your great session. I do have a question for you, but let's since the riddle is shown up here, let's firstly actually wrap up the riddles and have the prizes. But yeah, and of course there are some questions in the chat. You answered most of them. Thank you very much for monitoring the questions. So guys, as you know, we have the riddles and vouchers in Microsoft Fabric Cafe. So the riddle number one, let's go for it. Which isolation levels are supported?
Yes. So which isolation levels are supported? We've got all of them, right? So, the engineering team have brought in all the isolation levels into the Fabric Warehouse. Snapshot only. They've only got one isolation level. Or we've only got read uncommitted. So we can just query our data at any state that it's actually in.
We already have actually one answer from Sanjay. Snapshot.
Minutes.
Any other responses? Any other answers for this riddle? Yeah, Sanjay is also talking about B, which is a snapshot. Tony is saying about option B, also snapshot. Yeah, I think we can reveal the answer.
Yep.
Please.
Awesome. Snapshot isolation only.
Awesome.
Which is the best. Which is the best.
Sanjay, your answer came first. Before revealing actually the options. Thank you very much. So Sanjay, just send us a message on our LinkedIn page. I will assist you with the voucher. Thank you very much. And thank you, Andy, for your nice riddle. And I guess you have another riddle as well, isn't it?
We've got one more.
Cool.
We've got one more. So, it should be riddle two. So, which restore points can you use? We've got automatic restore points, and we've got Copilot generated restore points, or user manual generated restore points.
Cool.
We'll just leave it for a minute.
Yeah, there's actually a delay and on LinkedIn. So it's going to take time to maybe answers come in. But from Tony, we have 2A, automatic. Sanjay is talking about A and C, automatic and user manual. Anyone else? Any more answers? Oh, yeah,
Shall we
you
go
can
for it?
go for revealing the answer. Awesome.
Unfortunately, we don't yet have Copilot generated statistics.
Cool. Awesome.
Copilot
So,
generated. But yes, I've got there's a message. Yes, so Sanjay. So if there's a question here, so I'll just repeat the question. If I remember it correctly, there's something in Synapse. Yes, probably Synapse serverless. That statistics of the first 32 columns will be collected. Is it the same in Fabric as well? I believe so. Yes. So if there's anything to the contrary, I'd like to be pointed in the direction. But yeah. So basically, for both the warehouse and I think Lakehouse statistics collection, yes, it's 32 columns. So yes, ordering the columns accordingly would be important.
Interesting. And there's some comments actually. One from Sanjay. In the beginning of the session in Synapse Warehouse, we used to define different workload groups. Is it going to be the same, or other is any built-in intelligent workload management like in Databricks SQL serverless?
Hope so. Yeah, we hope so. So I think it's been a well-requested feature because I mean, obviously, if you provision a Fabric capacity and then you provision a warehouse, the warehouse is just going to use the relevant compute to return the query. But obviously, if you're running heavy workloads and you want to constrain it, then at the moment, no, it's not going to. You're not going to be able to say this warehouse in this workspace. I only want it to use 50% of the available capacity, for example. I'm hoping that functionality will come. I mean, like I said before, that's what I used to provision and configure when I used Synapse dedicated SQL pools, or that as your SQL data warehouse, because you could effectively have one compute and separate it into however many areas you wanted. So I normally separate it into an ingestion workload, a querying workload, and a data model, Power BI data model refresh workload.
Yeah.
And it would literally subdivide the compute and minimize noisy neighbors in terms of workload. I mean, it does it in Fabric itself. So even the warehouse, there is a separation between table modifications, data modification, and data reading. So there is some intelligent workload management going on there, in which Microsoft have separated under the hood the modification of data and the reading of data, so that the compute doesn't clash with each other. But it's nothing that you've got access to, and nothing that you can configure at the moment. But I think it's one of the most requested features in terms of compute. Oh yeah, so we've got another question. So so you can run queries across warehouses in the same workspace with a 3-part naming convention. So if you've got 2 warehouses in the same workspace, just reference the warehouse in the first part of the name, then the schema, and then the table name or the object name. We can't run it across different workspaces at the moment. We can't create shortcuts from warehouses as well, which is very irritating. I'd love that support to happen as well. I mean, you can get around it. I mean, you can create a lake house in the same workspace as the warehouse, and then use the lake house shortcuts to go out to any warehouses that you wanted, and then from the warehouse in the same workspace as the lake house, query the shortcuts as if they were local tables to the lake house.
Yeah,
That's the sort of thing, to get around it. And it's, I think, I think that's because at the workspace level, um, that's where things start to get separated in terms of compute. Even if you've got multiple workspaces and they're all using the same capacity, at the workspace level, it could be using a different capacity. So then it becomes quite challenging in how you query one warehouse in one workspace assigned to one capacity with a warehouse that's in another workspace that's assigned to a different capacity. I think that is probably the reason why we haven't got this functionality about running queries across workspaces, because essentially it almost, if I was to think of it like SQL Server functionality, it's almost like linked servers. Yeah. So, anyone familiar with creating a linked server in SQL Server, it's so that you can query one server from another server.
yeah,
So they're going to have to implement something similar in Fabric, because I always like to think workspaces are like
I
servers.
see. So I have a question from my end actually for you. Uh, I there is a feature and functionality of migration from Synapse, right, to
Yes.
Fabric Warehouse. Is there what is there any common issue when they are migrating from Synapse to Fabric Warehouse? Is there anything that DBAs can consider before starting the migration? Let's just talk about this section as well, please.
Yeah. It's good. It's good. Great question. So so there's some functionality. I think it's in preview at the moment, and I've been testing, playing around with it. But so this is to migrate from Synapse dedicated SQL pools into Fabric. Microsoft have tried this several times. They've tried creating tools and processes to be able to migrate from these systems before. One of the problems that we've had previously is that within dedicated SQL pools, we can create tables and we can give it distribution properties, right? We can tell dedicated how we'd like to distribute our data, right? And depending on our data loading and our querying, we can set one or multiple columns as the distribution columns, right? So essentially that will mean that, data that meets a certain condition will be stored physically on, you know, this storage, and then this data that meets this condition is going to be stored on, the other storage, and so on and so forth. And the partitioning, right? So we've got partitioning as well, and doing a lot of this migration
Yeah,
has been a bit of a challenge. So what we've got now is, yes, this migration tool. It essentially will, read the metadata of the tables. Because Fabric warehouses are closer in functionality and have probably the same limitations as dedicated SQL pools, it's a little bit easier to align the table
yeah,
constructs. So it's going to query the tables metadata, and it won't matter how that table is being replicated in dedicated SQL pools, or sorry, how it's being distributed in dedicated SQL pools, because we don't have any of that functionality and we don't care about that functionality in Fabric. It's going to take the table definition and just recreate
yeah,
it. So tables have been fine, really, in terms of migration. And then you start getting into code, right? So if you're doing a complete like-for-like migration and you're migrating loading procedures from Synapse, yes, the tool is going to tell you what it can't do. So if you've got merge statements, in your logic within your dedicated SQL pools, that's going to come up and say, I can't migrate this because merge isn't supported, or if there's any syntax that isn't supported. So yeah, it's
Challenging one.
I've always I've always approached these migration tools with
Yeah.
skepticism, to be honest. I mean, if for from the data perspective itself, um, you can move the data however you need it from dedicated. I mean, if you're migrating from dedicated, you'll dump it into Parquet. You'll be extracting it from dedicated, and you will be saving it as Parquet to then load into
Yeah.
Fabric. Um, so things like copy into, um, you know, essentially you could just maybe automate the creation of scripts to create all the copy into statements you need. So maybe you use the database migration tool to just do the tables, any SQL store procedures that have supported syntax, and then for the data loading, you just
Yeah.
use copy into.
Cool. Thank you for answering. That's as you mentioned, it is in preview, and there are lots of limitations sometimes. But yeah, I'm not sure if you still have time to stay for two more questions. I know
Yeah, of
that
course.
we have passed the dedicated an hour. But there's a question from Tony. Does warehouse support materialized Lakeview?
So, is this going to be like the new up and coming functionality? So, yeah. So, Tony, is this going to be the new up and coming functionality that we've been shown in terms of almost like a Delta Live table functionality where we're creating views, and due to the declaring of those views and the select statements, it then builds a DAG in terms of what views are going to be run before. I mean, I think yes, ultimately I think I mean it should be supported at some point. I mean, I need to get my hands, or basically when materialized view functionality becomes publicly available, then we can dive in and see. But I don't know yet, to be honest.
No problem. Cool. Thank you.
And we've got out of context question. No, no. Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go. So, can we build semantic models in Fabric based out of Databricks SQL serverless data warehouses? What challenge I'm sensing is when table contains billion of records, we won't be able to import the data into Power. So we just direct query mode to build the model structure. I mean, I couldn't answer that now. That's all going to depend on if Databricks serverless has support for direct query. I would think that it would have. I would think that that is exactly the kind of integration that Databricks and Microsoft would want. Is open up Power BI desktop, however you author your Power BI models. You know, get data, connect to Databricks, and it's going to tell you if you want to import or run direct query. So yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, you'll probably find the answer to that question yourself with a little bit of Google, or maybe ask um, Copilot to see if it can help you do that. But ultimately, if the data, if let's say you were using Azure Databricks, then that data is going to be stored on in Azure storage. It's going to be stored in Delta format. I mean, serverless is just is the the SQL compute over the top of that data. So, I mean, you either could connect to it, the serverless, the Databricks serverless endpoint in Power BI. I think that's supported. Pretty sure it is. I don't know what different modes you've got. You probably won't be able to do direct lake speeds. If not, then create a lake house and then shortcut to the tables that, or the delta fold, the location where serverless would be looking at the data.
Cool. Thank you very much, Andy, and thanks everyone for attending. I'm gonna just share my slides quickly. The session with Andy is done. Thank you very much. That was great session as always, and we're looking forward to host you again, Andy, with your next session. But yeah, and if you missed the session or you want to rewatch it, for sure you need to rewatch it. Just feel free to rewatch it on our YouTube channel. It's going to be available there. Our next session for next Friday, actually, my time at 6 p.m. Is gonna be with Sumesh. It is already announced that you can go for the registration. And thanks for attending again. And just follow us on YouTube channel, LinkedIn, join the Microsoft community group, and also don't actually forget to rate our sessions on Meetup. It is going to help us to learn about your preferences and if we have done anything wrong, or if something can be better. But yeah, maybe back to Sanjay. There was Sanjay comment here. There was a 1 million result limit for direct query, and yeah, and just thanking you, Andy, for answering. Cool. If there's anything to add, Andy, feel free to do it. If not, we can wrap up the session, and wishing everyone a great weekend.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you very much again. And guys, stay tuned for the upcoming sessions, and see you